We're not thinking about this moment. We're not even thinking about this year or this decade or this century. We're thinking about what our role is over the course of time itself and what we can do in this particular moment to change what happens next.
Sustainability is an intergenerational project. You know, we need to work with all the generations that came before and all the generations that might come after.
Kind of theme of the project is the climate emergency and climate change, and one of the biggest kind of topics of conversation when these ideas come up is food and food production.
When you listen to people talking about green issues or climate change or anything else, it makes me think of the times when we hadn't as much industrialization or processing.
Green ways and making our communities better places to live.
Bringing that energy security into real focus, and also the cost of energy, bringing it into the forefront of people's minds.
If we're to go 1,000 years in the future, and if we're to look at a time horizon, which is today, what would we see?
My name is Maeve Stone and I'm Artivist in residence at the Project Art Centre, and as part of my residency with the project I am working on the Rhizome as a mentor to Louis Haugh, who is the artist who's working with the Fatima Group.
The Rhizome network, what it's really offered is, I suppose, is an expanded sense of community around the work we do here, and expanded sense of different people with different disciplines and also different life experiences for us to kind of rub up against and create like exchange with. It's wonderful to kind of see the group interface in an intergenerational dimension with the Fatima Group, and then also to kind of rub shoulders with like really high level practitioners and academics. So I'm talking here about Professor Quentin Crowley of the Centre for the Environment in Trinity. I'm talking like people like Sarah McCormick from an engineering background, also on Trinity, but with a focus on renewable energies. So to bring these people kind of together and work together, and then of course with Louis like operating in quite like direct association with the Fatima Group, you know, it's created this like really rich kind of network of exchange and dialogue.
So we're using, instead of buttermilk, we're using any. It could be soy, could be oat, could be almond, any non-dairy, and it's going to make the milk kind of curdle and separate as well. One of the more important things of these sessions for me is that they're not classes and they're not workshops. You know, I'm as much in the dark as some of the other people. You know, first time making flatbread, first time making oat cakes. You know, I'm not practicing ahead of time. And it's nice when other people can kind of take the lead, take the initiative and lead the group. So it's kind of this intergenerational kind of exchange, intercultural exchange as well. So I think that's really, like, there's a lot in that to see, you know, Mary Kennedy teaching Wafa how to make Irish soda bread, and then, you know, when it goes in the oven, Wafa takes out this kind of traditional sweet that's eaten during Ramadan, and then we share that while we're waiting for bread. I think there's a really gorgeous opportunity there for, like I said, kind of intercultural exchange and crossover and kind of, just being with other people, really.
I think food and food security is a really interesting conversation in the context of climate emergency because, primarily we need to know that our sources are safe, and currently our global food supply is quite precarious because it's dependent on any number of factors, geopolitical factors, large weather events, as we've seen in the recent past, the war in Ukraine. So there's, I guess, the more disparate, the more global our supply is, the less protected we can ensure it is. So there's something interesting happening, I suppose, where we're starting to look at localized food sources, local food production. And I think that really encourages people to think about what the local environment can provide well, and it reconnects us maybe to a historical understanding of what our farming used to be. Currently it's a very monocultural farming sector. We have huge production of dairy and beef and very little tillage and very little crops grown. So if we're looking at the future, thinking about the future, I think the opportunity and the positive opportunity is reconnecting with what our land is good at providing for the people here, and beginning to reframe and reimagine how the future of farming might look at it.
It's been the most amazing programme, and the involvement with the intergenerational part of the programme has been amazing.
Well, I think it's a two-way thing. I think young people have opened my eyes to a lot of things that I never would have heard of, like reuse, recycle and whatever.
Reduce, reuse, recycle,
like years ago you did that if you had no money. But even when you have money, you have to think about what you're going to spend your money on. Mm-hmm. So I think I have learned as much from the younger generation as I ever knew, which is great. And I'm glad they're out there. Mm-hmm. They're the future.
And it's okay, listen, it's an exchange of knowledge, no matter how old you are. You can start a journey at 6, or you can start a journey at 66. It's not a hierarchy. It's not I know more than you. It's all, we're in it together. There's only one planet. It's a finite resource.
And the involvement with Trinity and NCAD, all the people here, and it's been such a wide-ranging programme, wide-ranging with institutes and people and regions, and it's really a bottom-up approach. If you don't have locals involved, it's just an academic exercise.
If you're talking about food, you're talking about farming, those are the key ingredients. Be it solar energy, the sun used to grow crops, or the soil and the integrity of the soil is, I suppose, the first part of the puzzle when we begin the food cycle. And at the moment, I guess there's a big conversation happening about farming practices which tend to diminish the quality and the integrity of the soil over time without rebuilding it. And again, I suppose our more traditional farming practices, smaller scale, local growing, and crops that are maybe compatible with local landscape in a way that would have gone back decades, if not centuries. I think that's the opportunity where we can begin to rethink, if we need to grow on scale, how can we do it in a way that's making sure that we're putting nutrients back into the soil and not just taking, because there's a finite amount we can rely on in that sense.
See this? Watch this. It's a wasp nest, Vespa vulgaris. So part of what we do in the field, we acknowledge human and non-human worlds. I suppose the field was very much born out of the kind of situation of the pandemic where we couldn't conduct normal kind of teaching indoors. So we moved to teaching outdoors into this rather novel space that has got a kind of layered history of use and disuse over the probably last 200 or 300 years. In fact, you could probably go back further. This is in the Liberties, so if you dig a hole here, you really never know what you'll find. But what we essentially inherited here to become our outdoor classroom kind of hedge school, you might say, for the 21st century.
I'm Quentin Crowley. I'm an associate professor in geology in Trinity College, Dublin, and I'm also director of Trinity's Centre for the Environment. In the case of the field, this is something that really promotes learning and development of artistic practice for the students. It may create a kind of wilderness sanctuary in an urban space, and there's a lot of value in that. Something we've seen during COVID is that when people were in lockdown and really restricted in their movements, people began to really value the nature spaces in close proximity to where they're living. So you see this in urban centres all over the world, where there's a lot of value now placed on, the intrinsic benefits of being in nature and the mental health benefits, and just a space to breathe and get away from everything else. So they are very important spaces, particularly in urban environments.
So I'm Sarah McCormack. I'm an associate professor in the School of Engineering from Trinity College, Dublin. My area of research is in sustainable energy, and specifically solar energy and more thermal energy storage. So that was probably a year ago now. Kathy from the Project Arts Centre got in touch with me to say you were starting to work on a proposal and starting to reach out to scientists in the academic sphere, and would we be interested in working together to see what we could come up with in this space. So the field is really, it's really interesting for me. I know I've never been involved in anything quite like it before. It's given voice to many different perspectives, which is really engaging. And I came into the field first of thinking about it from what could I do in terms of that site, and how could I work with people in there, what do they need. And I was very much coming at it from they need electricity, and I can do that from my solar perspective. And thinking about it from the temporal nature of the solar resource and how things can function when the sun is there and when they don't function when the sun is off. So those from a very basic sort of technology point of view. And then I suppose after that I started to relax a little bit more and take in what was going on in the field itself, and started to engage with some of the students. So what we're hoping to work with Sylvia then is to use the dye that she's extracted and to use that in our luminescent plates that we work on here in Trinity. So what that's doing is it's concentrating all the light that's captured here, and you're able to collect it on the edges using solar cells. So we're hoping to see what the natural dyes can do from the field. And this is something really interesting for us, because we wouldn't really have looked at that side of things before. And then it's interesting for Sylvia in that she's coming down to do some measurements on the type of I suppose the characteristics that we would measure in terms of absorption and emission properties, to see the efficiencies and what she can do. So maybe looking at how she can change the concentrations of her dyes to make a better solar collector. So that's what we're hoping to work on with Sylvia.
This is the work of Sylvia Maher. It's just one small part of it. And you can see here where Sylvia has labelled these plants that are free growing. And which to common eyes might be just considered a weed or something to clear out. But Sylvia's given them the Latin name, Reseda luteolo. In Irish, I believe these are called either bui biog or bui mór, which relates to two different plants. So that's to say, big yellow or little yellow. And the bui or the yellow comes from the fact that these are dye plants. And Sylvia spent all year working with dye plants. And indeed has introduced scarlet matter to the site, but also had kind of attention enough to kind of recognise that some of the plants she used in her projects were already growing here. So this is this is kind of a triumph of attention and care right there. Obviously, having access to this space and to work in this space is an enormous privilege, especially in the context of kind of gentrification of Dublin City, where kind of property and land and territory is at a premium. So we're rather fortunate that the field, our director Sarah Glennie, has ring-fenced the field as a place to evolve into a community, into a garden, or to evolve into this kind of idea of an outdoor laboratory for dealing with issues around critical ecologies.
You need parks, recreation, you need playgrounds, you need community gardens, you need the 5-minute rule, isn't it? Be able to walk somewhere to a green space, because it's all apart hotels, and I think we need a change in political direction, more social cohesion, more green thinking, more sustainability, less of the growth business model that's driving Dublin into just being one big monopoly board. You know what I mean? It's not sustainable for a living city. So that's the crux.
I have a pet hate. It's all of the student accommodation going up in Dublin 8. It's just rising. And I could never figure out why there's no university and in Dublin 8, and yet all these student accommodation is available in Dublin 8, totally isolated from the community. We knew NCAD was there, but there hadn't been much communication with NCAD. So there has been a connection, but one thing that struck me as being really lovely is over the last number of weeks or months, a group would go to the Project Theatre, and would probably be the biggest group in the Project Theatre. We'd all know each other, and people are probably saying, who are all those people that know each other? A year ago, that wouldn't have happened, and you probably wouldn't, probably people from Dublin 8 probably didn't even go to the theatre. But we go in there in a big group and we enjoy it, and we get a lot and we give a lot when we go there.
I loved the fact that there was a lot of love and collaboration in the room, and I loved the link with NCAD. I just thought going to the field was just magical. It was just brilliant. So there will be a legacy, because it won't end. It's just spurred us on to collaborate more, and looking forward to a harvest. Let's go with the growing season and harvest up and get together again in the autumn.
I think that as creative thinkers, the opportunity, I suppose, to reimagine the systems that we currently use, and to, I suppose, paint a picture of alternate futures, to help people to understand and feel some of the data and information that we're sometimes overwhelmed by.
So science and art, you might think of them as very kind of disparate activities or entities, and I think they do have a lot in common. There's a lot of creativity in both, and I suppose the stereotypical scientist in a lab in a white coat, you might not think is a very creative individual. When you think about developing a research idea, you're talking about a concept which might only exist in your mind, and how you would kind of develop this concept and how you would interrogate this, and designing an experimental setup to measure response of something to a changing environment. All of this is a very creative process. Of course, you have to have a way of documenting this, and you have to show it's reproducible, and you have to be able to communicate this in a way that people understand. And I would see a lot of parallels between how a scientist may approach a particular challenge or a problem, similar way that an artist may approach a challenge from a conceptual point of view. A lot of my research deals with how environments change through time, but I'm largely focused on different kinds of timescales, not always in a human timescale, but maybe in a planetary timescale in a deep time. But I still find this very interesting, how we can look at a particular site and it has attributes, and these attributes, they change through time, whether this is through anthropogenic or whether it's through natural external forces. And the site in the field captures a lot of this. There's a lot tied up in it, but how the site, function of the site has changed through time. At one time it was a distillery, then it was a car park, now it's adjacent to NCAD, and now it's part of the curriculum where students will go onto the site and use this to help them develop their artistic practice. So the function has also changed, but physically the space has also changed. So the whole concept of changes through time, that nothing is static, nothing is stable. The only certainty is change, really, and we're talking about the time scales of these change in the space that this occupies.
Thinking about soil really sort of pulls you towards the idea of deep time, and conversations that Quentin, Crowley and Gareth have had about that sort of elongated process which creates the bedrock of our living world has kind of, I guess, created a frame for the whole project.
This program here with you, Louis, it brought in the food security, food sustainability, and maybe our grandparents and their grandparents were ahead of the game because everything was actually more local and grown, and you had to survive with what you had.
Well, I would love Dublin 8, 10 and 12 to be the new university of the future, where community participated in the education and the planning. I've been through about 5 different recessions, or what people call recessions. It's doable. There's nothing to be afraid of. Get out there and boogie. You know, and they talk about young people's mental health and worrying about, don't be worried.
And you know, the aim of community work is to build community, and sometimes it's not done. But this process was like health by stealth, community work by stealth, building community, making that community field bigger, and interacting. It's very few projects that are intergenerational or intercultural. It's a hard thing to do, and this just seemed to naturally progress week by week. You just look forward to it.
Instead of telling people what they can't do and can't have, show people what they can do and can have in a positive way. And I think by changing people's mindsets in very small ways, I think it can have like this ricochet effect. Now we're not going to stop climate crisis overnight, or as a group of 8 or 10 people, but I think these small steps that we can take start to change the kind of broader collective mindset of society, hopefully.
The social side was my favourite of all. I thought going down the field, or even coming here to look at each of us having a go at making things, was like a social occasion. So I'm going to torture people
Good.
to keep it going.